Alrighty, we are live to start our pre-meeting. So I don't know if we want to, anything we need to chat about. It's a pretty light agenda today. We'll be welcoming our new member, Thomas McLaughlin, approving minutes, assuming we can get a quorum. We have an opportunity to kind of talk through the roles and review process of the DRC. Just maybe a good reminder for folks and talk a little bit more about any questions or issues that folks have been grappling with since we've been doing this for a year and a half, give or take 16 months or so. And then we have one informal review item for the Biltmore Pavilion project at 137 Biltmore Avenue. So hopefully we'll not be here too late.
Yeah, it'll be a nice change.
Well deserved.
Yeah. Thomas, do you have any questions about anything?
Will and I had a pre-meeting before, so he filled me in on a lot of the work you guys do. So
yeah, gave him the whole spiel, which was a good reminder for me too about all the stuff we do. It's a lot to take in all at once, but you're in good company to get up to speed. And I guess we have a few newer members. I mean, the committee's not that old, but even so, we have Christina and
Catherine.
Yeah, both relatively new. Ricardo too, actually. So really, yep. four of our 9 members have only be here a few months, and the other 5 are the old timers. It looks like. Kimmy.
Hey, Kimberly.
Hi.
How are you?
We're just in our pre-meeting now, Kimmy. So it's just any chance for any informal discussion or questions about any of the items on the agenda. It's a pretty light agenda overall, so we shouldn't be here too late this afternoon.
Thanks. I do need to jump off that too. So I'll tell you that now, and that way I'm not typing it.
Okay, sounds good. We should be done before then.
Are these pre-meetings always this exciting?
They're they're usually a little more lively. I guess everyone's a little bit burnt out this week. Usually we have some like really exciting projects besides yours on the agenda to really dig into. So I guess everyone's saving their fire for the informal review. Okay. We're just doing our pre-meeting now, Kate, and if you have any questions or comments on anything on the agenda, otherwise we'll officially start in about 8 minutes or so.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep, sound good.
Okay.
Do we need to, Will, are we going to need to address whether we're going to continue doing in person, the whole hybrid discussion for this one?
Yeah, we will need to discuss that probably at some point. I'm checking to see, I haven't gotten a definitive answer yet, whether we are considered advisory or not. I think we're somewhere in between advisory and quasi-judicial because we, especially for hotel projects, we do more than just advise. So we may not have the option to stay virtual, but I will know for sure.
Well, my understanding was everybody had the option to stay virtual if the supermajority whatever voted to do so, correct? Or has that changed again?
I don't know if it's changed or not. It's but my understanding is that only advisory committees have the option. So if you're quasi-judicial, quote unquote, you don't have the option. We're not really quasi-judicial. We don't have that type of, we don't review variances, but we're also not advisory. So we're kind of in this gray area.
Well, okay, so I've got the memo pulled up. It says the boards may continue to hold remote meetings if a supermajority of the advisory board votes to hold remote meetings, 2/3 of membership, and we have to commit to doing it for a year. And we have to, right now, the only options are fully in person or fully remote.
Yeah.
We don't really have a hybrid option.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the question for this particular one, are we an advisory board? I would say we are, since we are, we have a statutory duty for hotels. They have to come through here and receive approval if they're not going to go to council.
Right. And actually, I would say that would maybe mean that we're not advisory because we have that approval authority for hotel projects. You hear what I'm saying?
No, because, okay, well, maybe I don't know. So is Downtown Commission an advisory board?
Yeah, so I think downtown Riverfront, I think that would be considered advisory.
Okay. So what you're saying is that if we're not an advisory and because we're mandated, we might have to come back in person.
Correct.
Okay.
Although we haven't really, well, the other quasi judicial boards have returned in person already, like planning and zoning and HRC. So that's why I'm a little bit confused about our status, and the clerk's office and legal are kind of looking into it. I just haven't gotten an answer yet.
Well, the remote option allows people to participate that wouldn't normally be able to participate in this process because they can't get off work and come drive all the way downtown for a midday meeting.
Yeah, both members and the public, you're saying.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely correct. So, I mean, if there's any way we can consider ourselves an advisory board so that we can continue to do this, I think it makes it honestly way easier for participants, including a lot of the consultants and architects we deal with coming in from out of town.
Yeah.
Enabling them to do that. Kimmy, that's a nice photo. Oh, hey, Alex, what?
Hey, I was just gonna say, I think it's the, like, because we're not in a state of emergency anymore, if you land in a spot where you're not advisory, obviously, then it gets trickier to meet virtually. I think we all wish we could meet virtually, but.
Yeah, I know it's part of the North Carolina open meetings law that we're having to comply with, understand that. I would just press for, even if we, the members need to be in person, I would press for some kind of hybrid to allow public remote access and public participation. And I know that's a big ask, but I think that's something that we need to work on.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the city council heard that pretty strongly at their meeting when they adopted this new policy, that they will continue to explore options for hybrid meetings, which I guess is tricky to pull off, but I agree that kind of gets the best of both worlds.
I mean, it's a camera and a microphone. We do it professionally all the time.
Yeah.
I know it's a lot harder with you guys because you've got to do the YouTube and there's some public access stuff. I understand that.
I mean, I can't imagine you can't figure it out. I mean, there's definitely a way of doing it. I just don't know. It might be some hardware stuff we need and whatever, but they're gonna continue to explore that option, since has been heard that it is a priority for members of the community. I certainly agree with that sentiment. Would folks prefer to, if we did a straw poll, would folks mostly prefer to stay virtual as far as if possible?
I would.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Makes it a lot easier to roll it into the workday, especially on these really long meeting days.
Yeah. Yeah, this is unusual in a sense that, well, I guess not unusual, but it is in the middle of the day. Yeah.
I also remember, Will, I know we're going to start soon, but when we were meeting in person before the pandemic, it was really challenging sometimes on the long ones to keep a quorum, and it really messed up voting on some things. So it just can be a healthier model so we could get down to business, get some things voted on quickly when necessary, and then people have to jump off. In some situations, they can do that.
Yeah.
I was just going to offer too that I think probably the hybrid, like whatever they're looking at the clerk's office in terms of hybrid stuff, is probably like it's tied to the study on the other advisory boards and commissions potentially being collapsed at some point. So I imagine that they'll probably kind of dovetail those two things together whenever decisions get made around all of that.
That's a good point. Well, I'll have more information in the meantime, and if we are able, and I'll let folks know via email prior to the next meeting, if we are able to vote to stay virtual, I will put that on the agenda. And if not, I'll let folks know, and probably would be our November meeting that we'd have to go back in person. So I will keep you posted. And being
I just want to make
12:30.
a quick
Oh.
note that materials can be an issue virtually, not being able to see them or know them. So I guess if we can just kind of keep an eye on that, if we remain virtual, if there becomes an issue with the materials, with the presentations, then maybe that's something to look at for bigger projects or something, is meeting in person.
That's true.
Like seeing like building material samples.
Yeah, because
Okay.
that was super helpful before.
Yeah.
You know, where we missed that virtually.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Do we want to get started? Good afternoon. I'm Robin Rains, and I would like to welcome you to the September 15th Design Review Committee meeting. This is a 9-person committee whose primary function is to perform design review for projects located in one of the city's 3 designated design review areas: downtown, the riverfront, and the new hotel overlay zoning district. This is a mandatory review, voluntary compliance process with one exception, and that's for hotels seeking to skip city council review. Hotels taking advantage of this incentive must receive a positive recommendation from this committee. All committee members and staff are participating virtually. We appreciate your patience. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engage hub link on the front page of the city website, and also linked on the committee page. You can also watch the meeting on the city's YouTube channel. We also have an option for the public to listen by phone by calling 855-925-2801 and entering code 9410. When we get to the public comment section, you may dial this same number and press *3. For those of you with us today, welcome. I will now go through and introduce all the committee members who are participating virtually. Please make sure to mute your microphone if you are not speaking. When you have a question or would like to speak, unmute your microphone. Please remember to mute your microphone after you're done speaking. Committee members, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Jeremy Goldstein, the vice chair, is not able to make it today. Catherine Ankaya.
Hello.
Hello. Christina Boer is also not able to make it today. Kimberly Hunter.
Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Stephen Lee Johnson. I didn't see him log on. He's not here. Okay. And Thomas McLaughlin.
Hello.
Hello. Brian Moffitt.
Hello.
Hello. And Ricardo Sejo is also not able to make it today. We do have a new member today, and I will let Thomas introduce himself. Welcome.
Thank you. So yeah, my name is Thomas McLaughlin. Recently moved to Asheville from New York City at the end of last summer. I came for a relative's wedding before the pandemic, and so I was just like, oh, I gotta move here. It's the most beautiful place ever. So yeah, since moving here, I was looking for a way to be more involved in the community, heard about this opportunity and applied. And I lived in New York for like 20 years or so, working in environmental graphic design, which is like, and specializing in like wayfinding, which is like creating branded environments, signage, maps. I worked on a lot of projects with architecture firms, design companies, on like public projects for like hospitals, transit agencies, universities, cities. And I also taught at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn for several years. And I'm currently design consulting for several hospitals in New York, and also a Boston design firm and electric car manufacturing company in California. So that's what I'm up to.
Well, welcome. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
We'll break you in on hopefully a pretty short meeting today. So we do have a quorum, so we can vote on the agenda. Okay, I will start with our agenda, and the first thing we need to do is approve the minutes from the August 18th, 2022 meeting. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the meeting, the minutes of the meeting as written.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll go through a roll call vote. Catherine.
Aye.
Kimberly.
Aye.
Thomas. You're on mute.
Sorry, this is my first time, so I have to vote on
Yeah, you have to vote even if you weren't here. I wasn't here either, but
Aye.
okay. And me, well, aye. Okay, the minutes are approved, and we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the presentation and discussion of DRC review of projects. And I will hand that over to Will.
Thank you, Chair. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I emailed that copy of this presentation earlier today. It's also in the documents folder for the meeting, in case anyone's following along and wants a better view of it, or wants to be able to click on the hyperlinks in the document. This is really just an opportunity to kind of, hopefully it doesn't feel remedial, but can be more of a refresher about how the DRC functions and how it reviews projects, because it does review projects differently between those that are hotels and those that aren't. So I think that distinction is important to understand. And this is just a brief presentation that'll kind of hopefully segue into any kind of discussion or questions that members have. It's kind of a follow-up to just a meeting between Robin and Brian from the respective downtown and riverfront commissions and staff about, you know, some of these projects and how they interact with the downtown and riverfront commissions as well. So hopefully it kind of gets folks a little more on the same page, and we can address any questions and issues. A couple newer folks on the committee as well, so it never hurts to refresh folks about the DRC. So in these slides, there's only 3 of them, but they're a little bit meaty. So just as a reminder that the design review committee, you know, how everything can be found in the UDO. So we're not making up the rules as we go. It's all mapped out. Maybe it's not always in the same section of the UDO, but as far as how the committee functions, a lot of information is prescribed in that. The specific role, you know, is stated. I think maybe the highlights in some of that text is that the guidelines do not dictate architectural styles. They suggest a variety of design options for achieving compatibility within the designated design review boundaries, along with encouraging consistency with other city adopted goals and plans. So just as kind of a good overview about, you know, what the design committee does and how they review projects. Next bullet just has a link to the design review areas. So as we know, there are 3: the downtown, the riverfront, and the hotel overlay, which includes areas outside of the downtown and riverfront where hotels can be allowed by right. And then, you know, something as a good reminder is that, you know, all the decisions that the committee makes, and then the recommendations that staff gives about formal review of projects, that's all based on the adopted guideline documents. So we have 3 of those: the downtown design guidelines, the riverfront river district design guidelines, and then the design guidelines for hotels outside of the downtown and river areas. So for the hotel overlay areas outside of those 2 design areas, there's a specific set of guidelines as well. Now, the projects that are downtown and in the riverfront areas also get reviewed by the Downtown Commission and the Asheville Area Riverfront Redevelopment Commission. And you know, staff relays those comments to the DRC in the staff report and presentation, mostly focusing on the design-related comments, although I think we pretty much just relay all the comments that are discussed at those meetings. You know, those 2 bodies are a little more, I guess, holistic in their review of proposed projects. So they, you know, take into consideration a number of factors of projects, such as like the social, environmental, economic impact, as well as the character and design and how it fits into the area. Those bodies have a kind of a matrix that they use to review projects that are much more broad than what the DRC considers. They also take into consideration things like the downtown master plan and the comprehensive plan. So just as kind of a way to say that those bodies review these projects as well, and they provide comments that are much broader than what the DRC considers. But we try to kind of roll that discussion into the staff report for the DRC's review, so they're aware of it, and that and also specifically that design related items get communicated as well. Throughout some conversations we've kind of had offline, we've identified a couple improvements going forward. One is a long-standing initiative to update the design guidelines for the downtown and river districts. That is something that we've identified as a priority, probably, hopefully, maybe starting in the next 6 months or so. We've recently kind of refigured our departmental work plan based on our current staffing levels and identified this as a priority, not an immediate one, but perhaps early to mid 2023, once we're up to more staffing levels and have the capacity to handle it. But it's certainly on our work plan purview going forward. And then something that we can probably do a little more interim in the shorter time frame is providing some kind of summary document about the guidelines and about the DRC in general for applicants and even the public to better understand what's in the guidelines, how the DRC functions and reviews projects and makes decisions based on those guidelines. So the guidelines documents can be pretty lengthy. There's a lot of information in there. So I think the idea was that some kind of summary to help folks understand the most salient points would be useful for folks. So it's a little more accessible. And then this slide just talks about the types of projects that the DRC reviews. So basically there are kind of three main types of projects and three bullets here. Major works, minor works, and then I guess projects that kind of fall in between in this gray area. So a major work is a project that's considered a level 1, 2, or 3 in our UDO. Level 3s require conditional zoning, and these projects that are located in downtown and the riverfront areas or the hotel overlays are reviewed by the DRC. You can see here it includes additions, renovations, or demolitions of structures greater than 5,000 square feet. So basically any new building project falls in one of those three levels, and they get reviewed by the DRC. Minor works can be approved by staff. So these are relatively small projects where there's maybe just like a building permit pulled on a property in the downtown or the riverfront area. Includes things like a lot of it's interior work that I can approve as staff without having to bring it to the DRC. It also includes exterior rehab and repair, as long as it doesn't change any character defining features or on the exterior. Let's see, things like painting, landscaping, signage, parking features, that kind of thing. Building additions that are 500 square feet or less for contributing structures, or 1,500 square feet or less for other structures. And then finally, I just wanted to call out that there are projects that don't meet the definition of really either major or minor works. I think a good example of this are like storefront rehabilitations that we've seen a couple recently, both of which run Lexington Ave, one on North and one on South Lexington. So those are kind of projects that maybe I err on the side of caution and bring it to the DRC, because they certainly change the exterior appearance of buildings in a design review area. but they're not a level 1, 2, or 3 major work. So that's kind of how the projects, types of projects hash out for DRC or staff review. And finally, the last thing I wanted to talk about, is maybe going to meet the meat of our discussion today, is projects in the hotel overlay districts that the DRC reviews. So essentially, hotel projects, if they're in these overlay areas, which are linked, I think there's a link there, or if you go to Map Asheville, there's a layer for zoning overlay hotel areas. And essentially, there are a couple different areas, one of which is District A, which allows for large and small hotels, and then District B that allows for small hotels only. So then small hotels are between 7 and 35 guest rooms, and large hotels are 36 and above guest rooms. Projects can basically seek to bypass city council review and approval if they are in these overlays and get a positive review by the DRC. And essentially what it says is that they can be considered a level 1 or 2 as long as the total square footage of the other uses besides the hotel is less than 100,000 square feet. And they have to be compliant with all the zoning requirements of the underlying zoning code, as well as the operational design standards for hotels, which is the third bullet there, links to that section of the UDO that has, in addition to the zoning requirements of the underlying zoning, there are these special requirements for hotels as well. But then, the second requirement is also then that the applicant voluntarily incorporates the recommendations of the design review committee as demonstrated by an affirmative majority vote. And, so consideration of the hotel projects is really limited to the design of the project based on the guiding guidelines, whether it's downtown or riverfront or just the hotel overlay districts outside of those two areas. So while, discussion might come up around areas and things unrelated to the design, we try to keep it very focused on the design of the project, and staff, analyzes and prepares the reports about how the proposed hotel meets the code and the UDO and then the operational design standards. And, that's kind of where that discussion about, those types of things, it should really be focused on the design of the project and then based on the relevant guidelines. And if the applicant doesn't voluntarily incorporate the recommendations of the DRC, or the DRC doesn't feel comfortable approving the design of the project based on the guidelines, that's okay too. Projects can always opt for city council review of the hotel project if they can't get an affirmative vote of the DRC. So really just trying to say that, the DRC should really only focus on the design of these proposed projects. But if they can't support the design of the project based on the guidelines, then they have every right to not give a affirmative vote for the project. So that's really about it. Hopefully that doesn't muddy the waters and makes things a little bit clearer, but just wanted to use that as an opportunity to kind of get folks a little bit more on the same page, provide some resources of links to more information, summarize things, and open the floor for any questions or discussions about anything related to the DRC or the review of projects in or outside hotels.
Thanks, Will. Kimberly has raised a hand, so
Yeah, thanks, Will. I love being on the same page. So thanks for this. Is it a good time, or even if it's appropriate, are there past projects, maybe something that's already been approved? You know, we wouldn't go back and review it again, where you can give maybe a good example of level 1 or 2 of the total square footage of the uses other than hotel or less than 100,000 square feet, like just concretely, so that, because I'm an extremely visual, big picture person, so I can kind of see it from a different lens besides words. That would be great.
Sure. Yeah, we've reviewed a couple of hotels.
I have a couple in my head, but I don't want to say. I just would rather maybe see if you have some good examples.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just off the top of my head. The one that was reviewed most recently was the 72 Broadway Hotel, and I think that was level 2. I think their overall square footage was just less than 100,000 square feet, but really, it could be a pretty big building. Typically a project downtown, if it's over 100,000 square feet, has to get a conditional zoning and go to city council. But this allows for a pretty big building with a lot of to be a pretty big hotel, really, as long as the other uses, so any retail, commercial, residential space, as long as that is less than 100,000 square feet, it can still be reviewed without getting conditional zoning.
And what about like extended stay, like that had like, I don't know, a banquet or hall or something attached to it? Like, how would that fit in here? And again, I don't mean to ask ridiculous questions. I just love being on the same page with people. So since you opened up Pandora's box, I'm like, give it to me. Tell me everything.
So how would like a banquet space be counted, or?
Well, with like an extended stay, with like, say that it had six rooms and 40,000 square feet, and I know this doesn't make math sense, in other space, right? What would that look like? How would is that fall under this level 1 or level 2, or it does not, because it's not at least seven guest rooms? So I just want to get real clear for myself,
Yeah.
so that I'm not confused when I'm looking at, there's all this space that's not rooms, but there aren't enough rooms, or there are too many rooms. I just want to get real clear. And maybe we should just have a meeting where I come to your office and we can talk about this personally. I don't know. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think it needs at least 7 guest rooms. That's how a small hotel is defined, is between 7 and 35 guest rooms. So I think if it has fewer than 7, it couldn't be a hotel. It'd be too small. I'd say any uses that are like related to the hotel would probably just be considered part of the hotel use. So things like a lobby, or would probably be a hotel square footage use. I mean, things like a restaurant that are open to the public and open to guests would probably be would be the other use calculation. So I guess when we're thinking about, like, I don't know, like condo hotels, or a mixed use building that has hotels and residential and ground floor retail, I guess we'd probably want to look at, what's the square footage of the retail and residential. And then that kind of drives, if it's under 100,000 square feet, then the DRC can review it. Extended stay hotels are a little bit different. They're a separate definition because they have like a kitchen involved, but I believe they'd be would still be considered as part of the hotel overlay. In the large hotel overlay, they're defined as containing 36 or more individual units or suites, providing accommodations for sleeping, sanitation, and a kitchen. but I sometimes get a little turned around in some of these definitions myself. So we probably have to like see that to understand a little bit what that would look like. But that is a little bit
Do you
separate.
think, and I'd be willing to like work on this, like as, you know, volunteer time. But like I know this is going to sound dumb, but like a rubric of where we even could like use past projects within the last like 18 months and like create a rubric that fits within these definitions to say like this, even if it didn't come to us necessarily, or we thought it should have come to us, or if it was before we were formed, like some key projects where we like go, this actually would be here or here or here. And so it actually gives that visual that's needed with the couple highlighted reference points. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think we could do that pretty easily. I'd be glad to put something together, based on some of our past agendas and the types of projects that we've been reviewing, and based on square footage, and why it was a level 1 and why it was a level 2, and then some visuals of that would look like, and that would be helpful. I think that even if it's just focusing on the hotels that have been reviewed. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'd be glad to put something like that together that we can send around and kind of use as a reference point. I agree that it's helpful to kind of understand real world examples about types of projects that have been coming through.
Yeah, thanks. And I think it would help like developers coming forward from just as a body, like us all understanding like what's been, whether we were here yet or not, what's been reviewed in the past, how we used the UDO and the hotel overlay district and all of these pieces to evaluate in the past. Not that we're going to do the same thing, but there's some level of consistency, right? And I think it could be really useful. So thank you.
Sure.
That's good feedback, Kimmy. Thanks. One thing that I find helpful about this is I feel like we've had a couple projects recently. One was an apartment building and one was a hotel where there's construction going on at my house. I'm sorry. Where there was some annoyance because I think that it wasn't clear how we were backing up our comments with the design standards. So I think that that's going to be helpful, but it's also going to be harder to critique design if we are only using the design standards for that. That's what I worry about. So, Catherine?
Yeah, I agree with you, Robin. And I also was wondering about the updating of the design guidelines. I'd like to know a little bit more about that, what that process is. Are there particular sections that you're looking into? And then is there a representative from any of the commissions or the committees that is part of that process? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we haven't really fleshed out what the process would look like yet. I mean, we could do some small updates to it, or we could just wholesale rewrite the documents, and we could still incorporate a lot of information and a lot of the guidelines still. But I think the downtown guidelines are over 20 years old, and Riverfront isn't much newer. Yeah, Brian?
I was just going to say, when we've talked about this in the past, so Catherine, quickly, we don't have the funding set aside to, in terms of staff time or outside consultant, to really, rework the guidelines the way I think most of us would like to see them reworked, where we had a full kind of 1.5 to 2 year process, go through, look at all of them, come up with a really nice form code document that walks through and brings us into at least the end of the 19th century, not the beginning, anyway. So but so one of the things we've briefly talked about is okay, what can we do in the meantime? And so I know I've started to identify a few things. I would like to, just a brief example, I want to rework the language that talks about building organization and hierarchy that mentions base, middle, cap. I want to rework that language so that it's clear that that's not that base metal cap is not required, but we are looking for some kind of, organizational principle instead. So there's some language tweaks like that I think we can get into. I have some issues with some setback stuff, but I don't think this is the time to address it. When you have forcing everybody to step a building back, the way our code's written right now is really odd. And I think we're getting some odd results as a part of it. And then I think there's some additional things just in terms of building planning and hierarchy and organization that we could probably tweak reasonably well. And that would be something, at least I know when Will and Robin and I kicked this around, that we would be involving anything with the downtown would involve the downtown commission. Anything on Riverfront would obviously, grab those groups, and anything for either one of them would involve this group. I think before we brought anything back to council. Does that make sense? Will, does that?
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. There are some things that wouldn't really need council review, like some update guidelines, only when there are some parts of the guidelines that are also in the UDO, in the CBD district, for instance, and those would require, I think, things like step backs are part of the UDOs that would require council review. But
And I don't know that we want to bite that one off yet.
yeah.
So it's more tweaking existing language, making sure that it's consistent across multiple committees. Is that correct?
That's something I want to start doing this year. And then the design guideline is just a bigger push. I mean, I've been beating that drum. There's several people been beating that drum for 5 years. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's been a long goal of the Downtown and Riverfront Commission. And I think since we now have a design review committee, it becomes even more of a higher priority. So whether we make some tweaks in the meantime or start with a wholesale rewriting sometime next year, we'll need to figure that out, but we'll definitely want to map out what the process looks like. Obviously, a lot of involvement with this group, a lot of involvement with Downtown and Riverfront commissions, and then, what does the public engagement side of it look like too? Something we kind of need to think about as well. So yeah, I don't have a lot of answers about how it would look. I know there's a lot of questions that I definitely could see being a lot of involvement from this committee. No doubt about that.
Kimberly?
Yeah, I wanted to say that I serve on a committee in another municipality that they have taken like micro and mineral update approach. So like every month there's another change or a revision that actually is super useful for establishing progress in like guidelines and such, design guidelines and development guidelines. And so I would recommend, it actually gets a lot done very quickly. And it's been real consistent. Like for the last 8 months, there's always something on the docket that's getting revised, changed, tweaked. We discuss it. It gets, fleshed out questions. And it's really coming from, similar to this group, from either, long-standing community complaints, professionals who are complaining about design guidelines. And it's just these core key things that are being addressed. Nobody's trying to tackle the whole thing. It's like, let's just keep the ball rolling. And it's actually been really nice because you're seeing an activated progress. And at the same time, you're not being held back by all the hoops on really big things that get tied to other, like UDOs, and they have to go through this process, or another process. So I would recommend, just from experience, if we take that approach, I think we can get a lot done really consistently.
Yeah, I like that, Kimmy. And I also like that it kind of keeps us accountable too, moving forward with our progress.
For sure.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments about this?
Well, yeah,
Okay.
feel free to reach out if there's any questions or you want to have more discussion about this, or if we get another hotel project, maybe folks want to brush up again on it, and I'm glad we kind of do a little more background work about either how we've reviewed projects in the past or when a new project comes up, really lay things out, maybe a little more clearly in the staff report and in the presentation and that kind of thing. Make sure we're all on the same page. But yeah, hopefully this is helpful, and there's some links to some good resources. I'll just reiterate that everything is either in the UDO or it's in the guidelines, and at least that gives some good footing to stand on. So thanks for the time to let me present this to you. Glad to answer any questions or have more discussion about any or all of this going forward.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, everybody. The next item we have is an informal design review. 137 Biltmore Avenue, Biltmore Pavilion, and it is being brought forward by my firm, so I will recuse myself from this discussion and hand it off to Will.
Thanks. I'm going to hand it off to Jeff here, who's with us today. Jeff, do you want to share your screen and present? Do you want me to share the plans? How would you like to handle this?
Yeah, I'll take the screen.
Alrighty. We'll take it away, and yeah, if you could introduce yourself, introduce the project, give some background, presentation, and then we'll open it up to discussion with the committee.
So I'm Jeff Dalton. I am with Row House Architects and work with Robin. We hold on one second. So these are the three, well, they're actually four historic buildings on Biltmore Avenue, just down from the orange peel. And they're being renovated to a 20-room hotel. Project was approved in March of 2019, and construction started about maybe a year ago. And the owners wanted to do a greenhouse conservatory type structure, and they worked with an architect in Atlanta who specialized in that, and she did a drawing in 2020. They moved away from the greenhouse. They wanted to shelter the guests. They didn't want to bake them in a greenhouse, so got rid of the glass roof and all that. In the interim, the architect in Atlanta retired, and we inherited this about 2 months ago. So the goal is to create some covered space for the guest to gather, have some sort of event. There's a commercial kitchen in 137, but there's a very limited eating area, so they're thinking they're going to maybe have some special pop-up food events in the pavilion, and workshops, and writers come and create, have some seminars and meetings and things like that. So this is the site plan, and the area that we're looking to build the pavilion is in the back of 137 Biltmore. And to give you, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with this stretch of South Lexington, but it's sloping downhill to the south. And this pad up here is at about a 34, 35 elevation. And we're down here at 23, 24 to 17. So, there's from this point up to this base of this pavilion is about 18 feet. Got a retaining wall here. So it's very much above the level of Lexington. And here is an old planting plan. And there's this whole retaining wall area is heavily planted. So it's kind of up in the air and not all that visible from the street. I mentioned the Atlanta architect. These were the first drawings she did, and this is dated almost 2 years ago. So this is what we were tasked with, was basically take this pavilion and we're the architect of record, and yes, Cynthia Talks is the design architect. It's nice to see hand drawings. Don't see that very often. We simplified a lot of this gable end and these brackets. Here's some photos of the buildings. The pavilion is behind 137. That's 137, 129, and 123. So here's the floor plan. To the south is 145 Biltmore, which is an 8-story condominium. And that backside is getting lots of plants to, I guess, shield both views. It's basically a glass box with some bathrooms and a small catering kitchen storage room. And these are the exterior elevations. This is the north elevation that's facing the parking lot. The west elevation that faces South Lexington. This is the side that's looking towards 145 Biltmore. And this is looking towards 137. And trying to do a pretty simple structure, a metal roof, clapboard siding, and a brick base. This is a big wall of windows. This is a wall of doors. And that's about it for, the design. Welcome to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about.
Brian.
Quick question. What will, based on everything we just talked about, what's our purview here? What are we? This is clearly a level 1 project. So what are we what are we reviewing? What standards are we reviewing it against? I mean, I'm happy to talk to Jeff and Robin anytime about their work. I just want to make sure I'm staying in my.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Very prescient question. Yeah, I think it's a level 1, probably based on the square footage. It's definitely major work, so you all will be reviewing it. It would be it's located in the downtown design overlay area, so the downtown design guidelines come into play. I think ultimately, when it comes through for formal review, it'll be part of a amendment to the conditional zoning that's currently in place, as it's not, since it's not on part of that old conditional zoning, it'll need to be amended to allow for it to be constructed. But before it goes to planning, zoning, or city council, it'll be before you all formally at some point.
One thing I'm vaguely remembering is that when they did these parcels, there was some kind of conservation easement that was signed with a preservation Asheville. Am my memory right, Robin, or somebody?
There's a preservation easement on the houses.
Okay, but not on this back piece, Jeff.
No, it's my understanding it's just it's like a facade easement.
Okay, and was there anything, is there anything in terms of historic tax credits or anything in terms of keeping congruity with those parcels?
They're not going for tax credits on this, any of these buildings.
Okay, okay. I'll let Kimmy speak.
Kimberly?
Yeah, thanks. I'm just gonna say what I think. I'm a little confused only because I remember this original presentation. So first of all, Will, are we kind of ixnaying any historical understanding we have about what this was supposed to be? And how, like, again, the historical thing, I remember that. So I'm trying to figure out like what's my role, because I for some reason this one's deeply embedded in my memory, and I'm having a hard time incorporating what exactly I'm supposed to say on this. I think when we reviewed it the first time, we were looking at the entire property, what could be done, what couldn't be done. We were talking about landscape architecture. We're talking about so many pieces. And now we're back to just like one piece. I'm a little confused. Thank you for helping.
So yeah, so this project was reviewed a couple of years ago as part of a conditional zoning, and it was probably reviewed by the downtown commission.
Yes.
So yeah, in a similar purview, those discussions might have been a little bit broader in general, although the design focus was still prevalent. So I think for this building, it's really understanding, how I would look at it more about how this proposed building fits into the context of the existing houses, essentially, especially the one it's directly adjacent to. And I think they provided some kind of elevations and renderings about that relationship. Ultimately, the formal review will be based on the guidelines mostly, or specifically, but maybe this informal review can be a little more informal. It doesn't have to necessarily rely 100% on the guidelines, but can be more about your reaction to the proposed building, how it fits in with the character, and how the design relates to the existing houses at the site.
Okay, that's useful. So, what materials are going to be used are being proposed?
We have a brick base and wood siding, or hardy siding,
Hardy.
and a metal roof.
Okay, thank you. It feels a little bit, and this isn't a diss, it's just because I know that part of downtown really, really well. And there's so many, it just feels a little bit like one of these things is not like the other, because you have the historic buildings that are on the lot. You have the whole Lexington Station situation across the street, and then you go into like Brewery City and South Slip. So I don't know, Brian, or the design folks that are designers, like what are your thoughts?
That's where I was going to go, and that's why I was asking a similar question at the beginning, Kimmy, is I was trying to make sure I understood like what my purview was. So, I mean, from a downtown design guidelines, it doesn't really get into congruity or anything like that. If you're using materials, okay, and then it's just transparency, and we keep going. Putting on my, and I know this again, I understand this is not a preservation piece, and I also understand that you have some, just as a standalone piece. Her little sketches were delightful. It's a fun little piece. I just don't find it as congruous with the houses. I mean, that Victorian style, the roof slopes. This looks farmhouse style to me.
Me
in
too.
terms of the massing, the roof slopes, the gables. It's kind of an American farmhouse style building against these delightful kind of Victorian. They've got a little bit of shingle, a little bit of, but they're mostly brick. Some of the it's got the the Italianate details in terms of the brackets and some pieces like that. I mean, they're really fun buildings, right? I know you guys know that. You're better at that than I am. And so, and even the little outbuilding in the back is just it's the only clapboard siding, lap siding is just in the gable. The rest of it's just brick. The window mullions are like, I think they're 8/8. Anyway, there's just a lot of stuff like that when I look at this, it's not congruous with what's out there. And so I know if you had been just given the opportunity, Jeff and Robin, to design, hey, we want a pavilion back here behind this house, you would have probably come up with something other than what that lady sketched. And I'd like to see your design. Sorry, not sorry.
And can I ask another question? So there was talk about potentially repurposing the bricks from the carriage house. Is that an option for this? I know this is in the original discussion in 2019. Is that an option for whatever the new design is, which would kind of hold true to the flow and the look and feel?
The carriage house isn't being demoed.
Okay. Well, back then it was, so, and they were going to repurpose the bricks.
No,
So-
it's staying.
It's
Okay.
never was proposed to be demolished.
Okay.
So Jeff, I'm curious, how would you characterize the significant features of those three houses? And just pretend like we don't have a proposal in front of us. And if you were going to do an accessory building on those, what pieces would you want to pick up?
It's brick mass with a porch, basically. All three of these houses had a porch. This one's remaining. You can see where there was one here, and that's being recreated. We have a photograph of what that porch was. This house had a porch. It's long gone. We don't have any photographs of it that I can think of, but we could tell from a Sanborn map it had a porch. For some reason, when this was to be a tax credit project, they were okay with reconstructing this porch, but for some reason, the state did not want us to recreate that porch, which made no sense to me, but okay. I think it's a very hard thing to do, and it usually looks gimmicky to go in and do those kind of details.
Agreed. Matchy is bad. Yes.
And in the world of historic, and Alex, feel free to jump in whenever. When you build new next to old, it's supposed to be clearly new, but at the same time in harmony with the old. And all of these buildings, all of these houses had outbuildings, and they were wood framed outbuildings, from what we can tell from the Sanborn. So I think a building, I think it doesn't necessarily have to be an all brick building, but I think a simple structure similar to what we have is an appropriate design approach. Just play it straight. Don't try to do all this bracket gingerbread, but kind of clean and simple. And that was the approach we took. Or we took after we were given what we were given. Simplify it.
Alex has a comment.
Thanks, Robin. Jeff, I was just going to add that maybe I totally agree and understand that, you're trying to differentiate the new building, but I wonder if it could just at least ping off of the historic building with some small details so that it feels like it doesn't really have a relationship to it. And it's so close to the historic building. I think that's another thing that's throwing me off, that it's almost wants to be part of the same overall massing. And now I don't know. I just feel like they don't have a very strong relationship design wise.
Yeah, I would, Jeff, I don't disagree I don't know that the building needs to be an all brick mass. For me, it's just the proportions, the break in the way that hip piece, the break in that sheds around, the roof slopes, the window mullion and patterning on those groups of three and that little gable end, that all reads farmhouse to me. When I look at that existing building, and it's so sizable and so close, it's beginning to read less and less like a smaller accessory building and more like a thing in its own right. And then I don't know where I'm going, but it just there's something about it. I think the building you've got is a nice building. I think the sketches that you were going off of was a nice building. I just don't know that it's either too close or not, but not close enough to the existing buildings. If you were doing just a glass box pavilion, a really modern piece here, we'd be having one discussion. And if you, but the way that it is right now, I think it needs to be, I think you either need to go one way or the other. I think you need to go ahead and go, okay, let's do it. Just a really fun, modern contemporary design here, or let's get more congruous. Am I making any sense, Jeff?
Yes.
I agree with you, Brian.
I agree as well. And I think it would go nicely, especially on that side of Lexington.
Catherine.
Yeah, I agree as well. And let's talk about that side of Lexington, because when I walk on to that side of town, I prefer to walk along Lexington than Fillmore Avenue, just because of the busyness of the street. And so I wanted to look at the site plan that you had up earlier. Or is this conversation just about the building?
I think it's the whole thing, because I think how that represents, you're right, Catherine.
So what I wanted to check was on the landscape plan that I think you mentioned is a couple years old. It had 2 retaining walls, right? Kind of sort of stacked. So I think breaking up the grade change, terracing. Is that correct?
At that time, but one of that lower wall went away.
Okay. So what is the height? So now we just have one very tall wall. Is there a view of that? And
So the bottom of the wall is 18 and the top of the wall is 28 through here.
okay.
So it's about 10, 11 foot wall,
And
it's diminishing in height, but not, by the time you get here, you're 7 feet.
mhm.
I mean, it's, if you know that stretch, there's an old wooden retaining wall that's failing and a lot of vines, and and those trees are not in good health, so all of that's being replanted.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm concerned about is clearing out that vegetation, which needs to happen, and then a very tall wall up against. And so it looks like there's a planting area then in between the wall and the sidewalk.
Yes.
And like what is that? Maybe 6 feet? Or just hoping that there can be, just thinking about the pedestrian environment along that sidewalk and like what the material of the wall is. It's a really tall wall and like maybe vegetation, something to help with that condition.
That wall and the landscaping has already been approved.
Okay.
And I have the site work is not in our contract, and we've not been all that involved with the site work. But I do know that it went through TRC and Suzanne Godsey. Stephen Lear, you may know more about this than I do, but
Well, then that's okay. I didn't realize that has already been settled. So thank you.
yeah,
Thanks for humoring me.
That's okay. All of this was approved. A long time ago, that was to be artificial turf. So I hesitated to put this drawing in because it is a little out of date, but I did want you to see the amount of landscape going in. I mean, this is all getting a lot of plants. So,
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that you had artificial turf in the pavilion. I thought, wow, that could be really nice. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any feedback?
so somebody recap, Brian.
I'll try. I'll try. Again, this is informal, and again, my understanding is that this is not a historic structure. So discussions on congruity and such are just that. They're just discussions, and I think this is one of those mandatory review voluntary compliance. Will, am I right so far? Okay. So under that umbrella, there are certain things you would have to do to meet the UDO. As long as you meet the UDO, you have use by right. So I'll preface the conversation that way. But inside that conversation, I would say that while I think the design that you have presented would work on a lot of different sites, the proximity to and just the delightful design of the existing houses along Biltmore, specifically the one you're closest to at 137 Biltmore, would I think you would be well served, and your client would be well served if you either made the pavilion more congruous with 137 and keyed off of some of the massing, the fenestration, and really the I think it's the massing and the roof pitches and the slopes that I was kind of keying off of in the fenestration. Right now, I think you have a farmhouse style accessory building juxtaposed against a very strong kind of Victorian. That's the best, Alex. You can jump in if you think or honestly, Jeff and Robin are better at that than I am. Anyway, I think you could make it more congruous with that, or I think you put a really fun. Not that that wouldn't be fun. I just mean you can put something contemporary here. In other words, what you have right now, because it's such its own kind of strong traditional style in terms of kind of a farmhouse looking style, juxtaposed against that Victorian style, I don't think it's congruous with the house. And if you're going to be incongruous, be all the way incongruous.
Kimberly?
Yeah, I was gonna offer a different design perspective that kind of summarizes what Brian just said. So when I look at this rendering, I see like an English garden with a Victorian house emphasizing the landscape, and then an event space or a carriage house or something separate. Or I see like a French garden. And when you do that in the middle of a city, I think, the way to think about the added building that's going to be added, 100 years later or whatever, is that modern kind of nod to pulling in that European English with the historic Victorian blah blah blah, with the modern juxtaposition that goes with the buildings on the other side of the street. So that's like my 2 cents, because that is, to me, how that part of Biltmore and Lex are perceived. And I think experientially, it could work really, really well for the client to amplify that, because that gives it a unique value proposition in the middle of the concrete jungle. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Does anybody else have anything to say? If not, we'll move on to the next topic, which is future discussion topics. Does anybody have anything you'd like to bring up in the future other than new design guidelines?
Chair, this is something that has kind of been an internal discussion that likely will maybe talk more about at our next meeting. But we, as staff, have been contemplating the idea of referencing the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation in the guidelines documents, which would be part of an implementation step of the preservation master plan that the city has adopted. So that's just something kind of thrown out there cold at the moment. And we're kind of just trying to consider, if that's something that would be appreciated, how to go about it, and the process forward, and get everyone on the same page about it. But we think it'd be a valuable supplement, as this discussion has revealed. We're looking at the downtown design guidelines for a project just like the one we were just talking about, that some extra kind of guidelines would be useful. And that could be maybe a short little band-aid for some of our guideline related deficiencies.
I have a qualm as someone who has enforced quite a bit of historic guidelines. I want to be real careful when you start pulling those into our downtown design. A lot of times, a lot of designers see anything to do with Secretary of Interior standards or anything historic, and they immediately think we're trying to spray the craggle on it, and they're going to try to reproduce or key off of, and you're going to get less modern designs. So when if we reference them, I'm not opposed to it, because there's a ton of useful stuff. And actually, the Secretary of Interior standards don't discourage in any way contemporary modern design. They encourage it actually as a way of differentiating historic preserved structures. But I just know how designers react, and I want to be careful that we don't communicate something to them we're not wanting to do. Alex knows more about this than me. Let her go.
Thanks. I should back up and say, because I know there are folks on this call that don't know me, I am the city's historic preservation planner, so that's why I'm chiming in here today. But yeah, so as Will mentioned, it is a goal in the historic preservation master plan that that the Secretary of the Interior standards be incorporated into the downtown design guidelines as an appendix, or however we want to do it. But I totally hear what you're saying, Brian, and I agree. I definitely do not want to discourage any designer from, being creative in our downtown. you know, to me, that's kind of the opposite of what the intent of the standards is. And I think that they're well written to, you know, to kind of speak to what we were just talking about, you know, Jeff's comment about differentiating the new building from the old. And I really do think that that supports a very contemporary design. Like obviously Arca's project at the Art Museum is a great example of how that can be really successful. But I think, you know, obviously this is a great example, this project we were just discussing, as well as the one we looked at on Lexington Avenue last time around. It would be really low hanging fruit for this group to kind of incorporate those standards, so that when we're just looking at contributing buildings, mainly that's where we're referencing the standards. Because like when I was writing the staff report for that project on Lexington Avenue, you know, my mind as a preservationist, I am referencing those standards, but I can't really formally do that to this group since you haven't adopted them. So just something to consider as we're kind of talking through, you know, potential updates to the design standards for this group. And then, you know, maybe that's an option for something that can be easily adopted and utilized, so that we don't have to like produce a whole set of design standards related to historic buildings in our downtown. I think it would be like reinventing the wheel. So
Can I say something?
Of course. We never formally closed your formal informal
Yeah, I guess
review.
we didn't. We weren't supposed to vote on it though.
I think making reference to the Secretary of Interior's design standards is fine. But if someone's not doing a tax credit project, they don't want to follow those standards. And if they're doing one, they've got to anyway. So don't make someone who's not doing a tax credit project follow those standards, because there are reasons people do a historic project and there are reasons they don't. And some of the great buildings around, you know, historic buildings and rehabs would not qualify for tax credit. You know, you think of Carlo Scarpa in Verona, the Castelvecchio. That wouldn't get a tax credit in a million years, but it's an incredible project. So, you know, like the Star Building, which we're following the guidelines because we want tax credits. And it's a different world. And I don't think you should force someone to follow it just because they're renovating an old building. And I'm not sure that's where that was going, but if it was, don't do it.
Well, that's I think that's what I was trying to say, Jeff, is that if you, for a certain kind of architect, it pings in our head when you say that. It's like, oh, I need to get into this mode. And then I just threw out a whole ton of options that, you know, a lot of times we would want to encourage people to do something. But then I think what Alex was talking about, Jeff, is like, I think it was the last one, maybe the one before, a little building on Lexington, somebody was replacing some storefront or some windows. And it was one of those where they're not really trying to do anything, but they're just doing something. And then, you know, we as a board is like, well, how do we judge what they're doing? And the Secretary of Interior standards would give us some helpful guidance, even if we weren't constrained by every a jot and tittle of it.
I think the wording in the design guidelines or wherever it's placed, UDO, that it would have to say that this is used specifically for I think we would have to somehow say this is for historic tax credit projects or projects trying to preserve something. I mean, just so that, you know, if a project isn't getting historic tax credits, we wouldn't tie them to it.
But what if it's a contributing building and they want to change it? At what point are they allowed to? That's where I'm unclear.
I don't think we've figured that out yet. And the other thing I would say about the tax credit thing is that, you know, that's problematic because of how long it takes for a project to get certified from the Park Service. I think the one commercial project I worked on took 7 years to get certified, and it would be impossible for the city to follow that with, you know, a developer. So, and obviously you may not eventually get certified. It just depends on, you know, what decisions are made in the application process. So I totally hear what you're saying, Robin, about trying to define it somehow in terms of like at what point do we, you know, utilize those standards, and maybe we don't. You know, this is just kind of, you know, open for discussion, obviously, at this point. So appreciate the input, because it's definitely helpful to hear what the designers out there are, you know, think and how they perceive, you know, using those standards. So.
Kimberly?
Yeah. Hey, well, I heard what you said a little bit different, so I'm going to just offer my 2 cents in a different way. So I do have a background in design in a very different field. And one of the things that I often think about is the ability to innovate. And, you know, buildings stand a really long time if you're lucky in terms of end of useful life. And the design, you know, what you're talking about, what I heard is, you know, I've said this often, but design at a scale, you know, there's some sensory changes that are happening in design. There are lots of different applications that are going to be continuously improved over the next 10 to 15 years. And so when we get real granular in certain areas, we limit some aspects of how designers see innovation and incorporating like what's happening now with like the box of what somebody said maybe 5 years before. So for me, I just think there's so many other areas that we touch that have to be regulated. I think it could be a breath of fresh air to keep this one more open, you know. So I heard it in a more broad sense of what you were saying, but I just wanted to offer like my 3 pennies to the conversation, or hey penny, whichever.
All right. So good discussion. Does anybody else have anything to add, or do we want to move on? Next on the agenda is public comment. Do we have anybody waiting in the queue?
We do not have any callers in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Well, if that's the case, then this meeting is finished, and welcome,
I have one
Thomas.
thing. I have a public comment.
No, you're done.
No. I want to make a public comment. If you can keep these virtual meetings, it is so much better for everyone involved. It's better for the environment. While y'all were talking, I went next door. I did some work, and keep them virtual if at all possible. It is more efficient, and a client does not want to pay me to drive to City Hall and sit for 2 hours or an hour or whatever, waiting to be heard. And if you can keep it virtual, it's much better. And that is, I will shut up and leave now. So thank you.
He's not going to leave unless we end this meeting. So let's close the meeting. See you guys next month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.